Okay, so do you hear me well? Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Luisa, for inviting me to share with you my experience for the last 8 years of trying to provide psychological and psychiatric support to patients with IBD at St. Mark's Hospital, where we have a little unit called the Psychological Medicine Unit. I actually tried to change the name of the unit to the Psychogastroenterology Unit, and I want to do a logo called Mind the Gut, you know, like Mind the Gap in the underground, because this area is a bit of a underground. And my manager doesn't agree yet, but I hope we'll get there. I'm originally from Israel and came to work in the UK 15 years ago and worked a lot in eating disorders. I'm also a psychotherapist, a Jungian analyst, and 8 years ago this job at St. Mark's was advertised, and luckily or unluckily I got the job. I say unluckily because we are very understaffed. I'm the only one who works full-time. I have 2 psychologists who work a day and a half. The unit has been in St. Mark's for the last 25 years, and my predecessor was more into doing assessments and sending people then back to the local services, local psychiatric services, and I decided to turn it around because I felt that most of the patients are not psychiatric patients, and actually they're not suitable to psychiatric services, and that the best place to treat these patients and help them is St. Mark's, where I can do joint work with the colorectal surgeons, with the gastroenterologists, with the dietitians, with the IBD nurse, and we can all meet together. It's also less stigmatizing for people because I found that my opening sentence to every patient is, I really apologize that you had to see a psychiatrist. The fact that you see me doesn't mean that you're mad. It means that this area started to behave madly, your gut, and because I'm allegedly an expert on madness, you see me, but don't worry. And it always reduces the anxiety and improves the connection, and it helps because I deeply believe in it, so I'm not saying something fake. The title I was given is the relationship between your brain and your gut. And I especially put your in colors and in different colors because each brain is different and each gut is different. And it's to individualize the care. We don't speak about a brain and a gut. We speak about Yoram brain and gut and Luisa brain and gut. They are different. And there are different memories and different life experiences that are embodied in these organs. But I juxtaposed the brain and the small intestine to see how similar they are. So we speak about the gut now as the second brain. Some people say that it actually was the first brain. And we have 100 million nerve cells in the gut, which is the highest area of nerve cells apart from the brain. And even an Israeli poet named Dan Pagis, who has a wonderful poem called Brain, says in this poem, the brain does not resemble anything else in the world except perhaps the small intestine. But we speak now about the brain and the gut axis. It's quite a popular buzzword, but actually our ancestors 2,000 years before Christ already knew that these things are connected. And I always like to open my talks with this image. This image, I don't know if you identify him. Anyone knows what's his name? Okay, so it's something new I can tell you. He's called Hambaba. And he appears in the oldest story known to humankind called the myth of Gilgamesh that was found on stones in Mesopotamia. The story, actually, if you want to read only one good story in your life, you don't need anything else. Everything is there. It's about Gilgamesh, who was a very arrogant ruler, like a sort of a modern Putin or Donald Trump. and he thinks he's almighty, and the country is very stable, but people cannot stand him because he's very corrupt, and all the women need to come to him for the first nights, etc. So they ask the gods to humble him. He's 2/3 divine and 1/3 animalistic. So the gods create a creature called Enkidu, who is 2/3 an animal and 1/3 divine. So it's quite fascinating how 2,000 years before Christ, they tried to find the balance between the body and the mind. And then they become friends, and through this friendship starts the punishment of Gilgamesh, because they go on a quest like two machos to kill a monster, and they decide to kill him, Humbaba, who is the guardian of the holy cedar forest. And there's nothing wrong with him. Unfortunately, he falls a victim to the need to prove the masculinity. And because they kill him, Gilgamesh starts to die, Enkidu starts to die, and Gilgamesh tries to save him, but then he realizes that he cannot save his friend, and it turns to be a very deep meditation about the impossibility to prevent death. So this whole book is about the incapacity to prevent things that we cannot prevent, sometimes like disease, all sorts of facts that we need to accept. But Gilgamesh is transformed through this. But what's interesting that Humbaba is called also the intestine face like God. And you can see very clearly the intestine here. You can say that all his face is like intestine. And for me, it's one of the ancient reminders that these things are one thing. The most holy prayer in Judaism is, "Listen, Israel, our God is one God." So there is this oneness of body and mind. And I brought this quote of an ulcerative colitis patient who said to me, "Losing my colon felt like losing a part of my mind." He said it to me after his colectomy. So obviously, if your mind is so much invested in this area and suddenly this area is not there, especially with colitis, where you get rid of the disease with the large bowel, it feels this part of mind is not there. But now, what we know about the gut microbiota, and I'll say much more, who knows what part of mind we lose with the colon. But it's important that it's not just a tube. Now, I don't know how many of you read this book. I think it's a very good book by a German microbiologist called Gut, the Inside Story of Our Body's Most Underrated Organ. And I brought this quote from her that is very beautiful about the origin of the self. Where the self originates, grumpiness, happiness, insecurity, well-being, and worry do not originate in isolation in the mind. We are human beings with arms and legs, genitals, a heart, lungs, and a gut. Science's concentration on the brain has long blinded us to the fact that our self is made up of more than just our gray matter. Recent gut research has contributed significantly to a new cautious questioning of the philosophical proposition, "I think, therefore I am." It may be time to expand René Descartes' proposition along these lines. I feel, speak about the gut feeling, I think, therefore I am. So that actually it all starts with the gut feeling. There is a fascinating chapter in this book about the connection of the brain and the gut, and she highlights the fact that the gut is connected to the moral center in the brain. And we know that many of our moral decisions start with a gut feeling that it's right or not. So there is a possibility that this place actually thinks or feels things before the brain can interpret it. Another image of the connection between the brain and the gut and the body. I don't think you'll be able to look at Michelangelo's creation of man differently after you see this. Obviously, the Italian friends know it very well. But in 2006, somebody at the Journal of American Medical Association looked at it and said, what is the structure that God is in, this structure? And he said, actually, it's a sagittal section of the brain. And I'm sure that Michelangelo, who knew his anatomy very well, and knew what he was doing, and especially putting a bit of science into the Vatican in disguise as a Renaissance man. But the moment that these two fingers touch, this is it. We cannot escape from the brain. The brain cannot escape from the body. Yeah. So, but actually, in my title was the relationship between the brain and the gut. Actually, it's very beautiful, this compassionate relationship between God and man. Actually, they're reaching out to each other. There is a sort of a compassion. But this is actually an attitude that we try to create in therapy, a sort of, I call it compassionate curiosity. Compassion is to suffer with, but you become curious. You don't blame the body, you don't blame the mind. You try to create a relationship. So God changes man, but maybe also God is changed by man. Yeah? Carl Gustav Jung said, we said that God is our father. Why not to say that God is our child? We need to look after God as well. So the body also needs to look after the brain and vice versa. This is another image for the connection between the upper part and the lower part. This is an illustration of what Avicenna was a Persian physician, a philosopher, and an alchemist from the 13th century, who was a real Renaissance man. And he said, connect the flying eagle to the earthy toad. You see, there is a frog here. If you can see, that is connected with a chain to the eagle, and you will understand our art. So actually, the doctor needs to be attuned to this connection between the upper part and the lower part. I recently, in the last 5 years, immersed myself in Tai Chi. And we always start the Tai Chi with this movement, which is, you start it and you do heaven and earth. Yeah? So you constantly move between the upper part and the lower part. And here, it actually shows us that sometimes the eagle wants to escape from the toad. So sometimes people want to actually leave their body because they cannot stand it. And I'll speak about suicidality in a few minutes. Or you want to ignore the frog, but you cannot. You are chained to it. And also the frog wants to escape from the mind, but he can't. So we need to try to help them not to fight with each other, but maybe to relate to each other. So this is a very simple loop of what is happening in IBS, and you know that there is a certain fracture of IBS in IBD, and sometimes it's hard to know where's the IBS and where's the IBD, but this is really a simple loop. Tension and stress causes a spasm of the muscle wall of the abdomen. The pain causes more stress. Stress causes more pain, and so on. So if we can reduce the tension and the stress, and by the way, stress is a fact of life. I'm stressed because I know I need to finish at 1 o'clock and leave time for questions, and I don't know if I'll make it. But it will turn into distress if I'll catastrophize it and if I won't see it as a pleasant challenge. So you can have stress without it turning into distress. So this is why there is a concept called perceived stress. John Kabat-Zinn, who brought mindfulness to the West, said, you cannot stop the waves of stress, but you can learn how to surf. So this is part of what you try to do in therapy. And also to educate people about this. And also to highlight the fact that it's not in your mind. This is one of the sentences I, as a psychotherapist, am very allergic to, because it puts the blame on the person, as if the person creates it. If you know the open gate theory of pain, you know that if all the information from the gut will go to the brain, we won't be able to think about anything else, because the there's so much information from these 100 million nerve cells, but there is a filter on the spinal cord that blocks some of the messages up. So we won't be informed about what happens here all the time. But for 5 groups of people, this filter opens up. And actually, you receive more emails from the gut all the time. And the people who receive more emails from the gut using this modern metaphor are people who had multiple surgeries, who had inflammations, who has infections. So this area is post-traumatized and constantly alarms the brain. Also people who, interestingly, were physically and sexually abused, or who are chronically anxious, or it's a learned behavior to get attention. It happens automatically. So I say to people, actually, it's not your fault. You are constantly bombarded with it. Now we need to see how you can manage these emails. Some of them maybe you can ignore, some of them you can put in a file, some of them you can answer and they'll stop bothering you, and so on. So we speak about the brain and the gut, but what about the psyche? You know, Psyche in the Greek mythology was a princess with butterfly wings. I think our psyche is called after her because our psyche is a bit butterflyish, and we also feel the butterflies in our stomach when we feel anxiety, or we fall in love, or we are afraid. So actually, I like psyche as much as I found of the brain, because it's more experience near. I cannot feel my brain really, but I feel the psyche. And how actually this delicate creature is connected to the inflammatory bowel disease, and how the inflammatory bowel disease affects the psyche. And in between these two things, we speak about the relationship of two people. It's not about just the brain and the gut internally, it's about the brain and the gut of the carer, of the friend, of the doctor. And actually it's whole two people that support and are supporting each other. So this is one of the most moving picture for me to describe support. It's Francisco Goya, the Spanish artist, painter that nearly died, and he painted this as a homage to his doctor, who gives him this glass of water. By the way, this glass of water led me to a very forceful argument with the psychoanalyst that works with me. We resolved it at the end, but because there was a patient who asked her for a glass of water. And you know, in psychoanalysis, you don't give immediately the glass of water. You are silent and you think, why does the patient want a glass of water? What does it mean about the relationship with the mother in early age? Is the glass of water representative of the breast? Who knows? Maybe she asked a glass of water for her mother and the mother didn't give it to her. Let's wait a bit. And at the end, she didn't give her a glass of water. The patient gave up, but then the patient made a complaint because she was so upset. And I said, I justify the patient 100%. First of all, we're not in a Freudian psychoanalytic ivory tower. This is a hospital. A hospital is about hospitality. This patient had a colectomy, so she's more prone to be dehydrated. And also, give her the glass of water, and then you can reflect as much as you want. What does it mean? And as a typical Israeli, I waved my hands, and then she said that I was rather aggressive and I'm intimidating, and so on. But I think there is you need to understand that the glass of water and the support is part of psychological support, holistic support. This is why I like so much this painting. And if you see at the end, at the background, there are all these dark figures, like figures of death, which brings me to the sentence in Psalms: even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because you are with me. Yeah. So obviously we are not God. And by the way, you know what the difference between God and a doctor? God knows he's not a doctor. So sometimes, you know, we need to go down and I said, actually, in our case, we are in the bottom floor, to go to the second, third floor and bring the glass of water to the patient. Because psychotherapy, therapia in Greek, means also to serve. It's a service. They speak in England about service users. It's the buzz term. So I said to her, so you need to serve. And if somebody asks you for a glass of water, you give them a glass of water. As you can see, it's hard for me to calm down from this event. Okay, so when we speak about support, we speak about psychosomatics, you know, in psychoanalysis. The psychosomatics is a case that the psyche is transferred into the body. That actually it's a psychological problem that was embodied, was converted into the body. By the way, IBD in the 1950s was the model for psychosomatic disease, and the patients were blamed from all sorts of things. And because it was a Jewish disease also, the Jewish mother was blamed for this, and all sorts of things that now seem quite medieval. And I think you'll be very humble in this. I actually, at St. Mark's, invented the term that I call it somatopsychic. So actually, something happens firstly in your body, and obviously it will affect your psyche. So it's and or. And for me, it's not relevant if it's the chicken or the egg, and what comes first. It's not relevant. It's actually, you need to work with what happens and try to understand the field of everything that influenced, and in a compassionate curiosity, non-judgmental way to address all that. Because the risk of psychosomatic is that people will feel that it's their fault. You just need to change your psyche and this will be all right, which is not the case. And also, we don't know. So we need to be humbled about it. And I brought these two images. This is Rembrandt picture, the angel fighting and supporting Jacob. It's an image for me how the psyche supports the body. And this is the Finnish painter Hugo Simberg, the wounded angel. And you see this strong man supporting the wounded angel, which I think is when you make the body stronger to support the injured psyche. So both things have to happen all the time. A patient came to me and said, "Why I was referred to you, doctor? I'm not mad. It is in my bowel, not in my mind." And when I explained to her a bit about the connection, she said, "You know what? You're right, because I was waiting in the waiting room. This is a patient with IBS, not with IBD. And I didn't know what to expect. I went to the toilet 5-6 times, and now I'm sitting with you for nearly half an hour, and I don't have any urge to go." And this is a priceless moment, because she now knows, she experienced the connection and the link. And by the way, there is a major difference between to know and to know about. I feel a bit embarrassed to talk with you about IBD because, I didn't have it yet, who knows. I had kidney stones. I can speak to you about the experience of kidney stones. But there is a difference between to know about and to know. To know is to experience. This is why, for me, the most important information is the experience of the patient. And the difficulty in IBD that all these subjective experiences, nobody sees them. These are subjective experiences. Pain, fatigue. How can you quantify fatigue? But the only way, and I say it to all the clinicians in St. Mark's, you have to fully embrace and accept what the patient tells you as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Maybe, because this is what they experience. The only people, in my experience, that will not tell you the truth are prisoners that want to be in a hospital bed instead of the dungeon. But most people don't want to be in a hospital. And if they come and they say, "Listen, I cannot stand it," this is what's happening. There is a famous case of Freud, that a woman came to him with abdominal pain, and he diagnosed her as a classical case of hysteria, just for her to die 2 months later from abdominal lymphoma. But Freud, in his arrogance, said, "But I cured her from her hysteria." That used the tumor as a hook. So we need to be very, very careful about this. And my approach is just to accept the subjective reality of the patient as the truth, because this is the reality. And if you listen, you'll get so much information. So to know too much is a problem. You need to start with not knowing. So not knowing, sometimes not only I don't know what exactly I'm doing at St. Mark's, also the doctors who refer to me don't know really how to digest me, so I receive referrals like that. To doctor, inspector, gut psychiatrist, and obviously the gut doesn't have psychological problems, as we know. It's the person who has the gut, who has the... So, but this is very serious, because we don't treat the gut. I don't receive a gut in my consulting room, I receive a whole person. But it shows how actually Martin Buber was a Jewish philosopher who spoke about the difference between I-it relationship and I-thou relationship, to relate to ourselves and to others as object or as a whole person. This is a risk in medicine, that we treat an organ, not a whole person. Or I receive letters like that. To Dr. Yoram, inspector psychiatrist for IBS. Because my funny name, which is a true name, my father was from Poland, and probably one of them was an inspector of some sort somewhere. But obviously, we don't treat IBS or IBD or a gut, we treat a whole person. But a bit, if we want some scientific facts, just going to the brain and the gut axis. So we speak about channels from brain to gut and from gut to brain. So it's quite detailed, and I'm happy to share the presentation, but because of the time constraint, I just run through this. So obviously there is a connection between the brain and the gut through the autonomic nervous system, the vagus nerve, the parasympathetic system, between the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the adrenal. There is a structure called modulating gut-associated lymphoid tissue, and you know that 70% of the body's immune cells are contained in the gut. So the gut is not that a digestive system, organ, it's an immunological organ. And you have the descending monoaminic pathways through the spinal reflexes, and there is a system called emotional motor system, EMS, and the output from the EMS to the GI tract can be altered due to primary central factors like depression, anxiety, and enhanced stress sensitivity, or it can be altered as a consequence of chronic inflammatory condition in the periphery. So the inflammation, but also depression and stress, can alter the motility of the gut. But now there is also more and more evidence that chronic inflammation affects the brain. So it's not just your psychology because of the stress, the inflammation itself causes something to the brain. So there is a book called The Inflamed Brain about inflammation and what happens to the brain. So there are inflammatory changes in the viscera, including the gut, can result in cytokine-mediated activation of vagal afferent pathways that go to the brain. And this vagally mediated brain modulation has been implicated in pain and behavioral responses characterized by hyperalgesia and social withdrawal. So inflammation causes the brain to have this sickness behavior. We spoke yesterday about this brain fog, which is something very specific that people with IBD experience. This can be just a direct result of the inflammation and what it does to the brain. Also, treatment with cytokine antagonist, anti-TNF, biologic provides immediate symptomatic, affective, and cognitive dysfunction. So cognitive dysfunction, they tested, can be affected by immunological responses. And there is now, it's a book from 2017, these two, Malenik and Raison, suggest that chronic inflammation may play a causative role in depression. That is actually inflammation causes depression in the brain. And also, this is interesting, chronic intestinal inflammation may result in decreased sensitivity to positive emotions, which is actually what happens in depression. You cannot enjoy things, you cannot be excited, and they showed it in functional MRI studies. So it affects the brain. And obviously now the macrobiota and psychological processes in IBD. For example, lactobacillus not only kept mice swimming longer with more motivation, but the blood was also found to contain fewer stress hormones. So actually, the lactobacillus improves your stress response and motivation. IBD is associated with an overall reduction in microbiota diversity, a relative reduction in abundance, and something called dysbiosis, you know, the imbalance between beneficial and harmful bacteria. And the interplay between the macrobiota and the gut-brain axis represents a potential pathways via which dysbiosis, stress, and depression mediate their effects in IBD. You know, they took two types of mice. One of them were very adventurous, and the other type of mice were very timid. And they destroyed the macrobiota with antibiotics, but before that they took a sample of each type of mice, and then they switched and gave the adventurous mice the macrobiota of the timid mice and vice versa, and the timid mice became adventurous and the adventurous mice became timid. So it's actually just little discoveries that show how much this actually affects us. To the extent that some of this suggested that the future psychotherapy will not be through talking but through probiotics. I hope it won't be just the case, but definitely this is a major factor. So they still haven't found that stress causes IBD. It's very complex, but in animals there are some evidence to this. This is a study that was done with a cotton top tamarind, a New World monkey from Colombia. You see the baby monkeys with the mother, and they separated the baby monkeys from the mother, put them in a cage in different temperatures, and they developed colitis and bowel cancer, and they never develop it in the jungle. So it's obvious being abandoned, being alone is not good. And there is a very ancient reminder to this. This is from the Bible, Psalms, King David, who said, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's words that Jesus quoted on the cross. Being Jewish, he knew these Psalms. And in line 14 is the description of what happens to you in your body when you are abandoned. And David says, I'm poured out like water, and my bones are out of joint. My heart melted like wax. It melted in the midst of my bowels. So everything sinks into the bowel. So we feel it. I had an experience with a patient in St. Mark's, very aggressive Crohn's since the age of 9, multiple surgeries, and I came to see him, and he walks very fast in the corridor, and his mother runs after him, and she says to him, wait for me. And he looks back and he said, when I was 9 you didn't wait for me. And he's in his late 20s. And then when I spoke with him, I asked him what was that at the age of 9, where the Crohn started. At that time he went with his mother to a shopping mall, and she bought for him a double cheeseburger, and he said, it's too much, mommy, I don't want to eat it. He says, no, I bought it, you have to eat it. He said, I cannot eat it. She said, you have to eat it. He said, I cannot eat it. She says, okay, if you don't want to eat it, I'm going, and left. And the mother herself was very problematic, from a very post-traumatized family, and abandoned issues herself, and she left him like that. For 3 hours, a 9-year-old child in a shopping mall, he cannot find her. It's a new, strange place for him. At the end, he found her in a queue for a bus, but the following day he had his first explosive diarrhea, and this was the beginning of his Crohn's disease. So sometimes it's like that, and sometimes it comes out of the blue, and you cannot identify something specific. But we know that in our language, we use it all the time. I'm gutted, I cannot stomach it, it is hard to digest, it is sickening, my stomach turns when I think of, and be scared, shitless. All these expressions are the knowledge that these things are connected. But let's give you a bit of the flavor of the referral to me in the psychological medicine unit. And again, I write, the psychological medicine unit of St. Mark's Hospital provides psychiatric and psychological treatment and support to patients who suffer from various gastrointestinal diseases and disorders. And this is a referral letter by a dietitian, just to show how people in St. Mark's, luckily, are very attuned to the psychological aspects. So she writes, Dear Dr. Inspector, I would be grateful if you can see Mr. K, 70 years old, who has been suffering from Crohn's disease since he was 20. He also experienced a steroid-induced psychosis when first treated with prednisolone. He is currently very low in mood, and he suffers from unbearable pain, most likely due to his progressive disease. His current mood and physical state are seriously affecting his quality of life, as well as impacting on his family. He was suggested treatment with infliximab for his progressive Crohn's disease, but he is hesitating whether to start the drug due to a mixture of factors, including his self-defense mechanisms. This is a dietitian, yeah? Previous medication side effects, medical history, which also affected his mood and mental state. So she's very aware that he has a problem with adherence based on traumatic treatment before with prednisolone, and he doesn't know what to do with the infliximab. He is now at the crossroad where your support will be crucial for his holistic care and for medical treatment. And I stress the word support. So again, this psychoanalyst, I'm mentioning her again, wrote me a letter when I defined the unit with the word support. She said, I don't think that as a specialized service, tertiary psychological service, we should use the word support. Because, you know, the word support is common. Your aunt can support you. We have a support worker. We are highly skilled professionals. Again, I said to her, if I need to leave one word of all this description, I would leave the word support, and I'll give you the historical context of it. The word support comes from supportare, convey, carry, bring up, and actually support from underneath, which is very relevant to gastroenterology, I said to her. And also, support is services which enable something to fulfill its function and remain in operation. So I said it's very appropriate. And also, the supporos were the people who supported the ill patients when they came to heal themselves in the temple of Asclepius, the god of medicine, in Greece. Asclepius was a wounded healer. He had a wound that never healed. This is why the wounded healers are the best healers. I believe that when you try to support your friends or support the doctors in supporting the patients, you do it in the best way because you know what it's all about. And when you came to the temple in the Asclepion, first of all, they would give you a bath to calm you down with all sorts of herbs and oils. Then they send you to a room to have a dream, because the dream was very important, the communication from the gods. And then the Sapporos would take you and bring you in front of Asclepius, and the idea was, we support and God heals. The person who was initiated into medicine in the Asclepion was Hippocrates, who said, do no harm, you cure rarely, you give therapy, you make things better frequently, and you must comfort always, and be interested in the person who has the disease as much as you're interested in the disease that the person has. So I said, I hope that after that you will agree to leave the word support. So she wrote to me again, I found your email rather aggressive. So it's an ongoing war there. Okay, so going back to Greece and to something that I developed to myself to describe what am I coping with, what people are coping with. So I created this metaphor of the Medusa of IBD. So you know, Medusa was a monster, beautiful female monster with snakes in her hair, that when she looks at you, she turned you into stone. Yeah, this is the only image of Medusa where you see that Medusa is suffering. Again, it goes to Italy. It is related to Bernini, the Italian sculpture. And Medusa is suffering. because Medusa herself was a victim of trauma. Not many people know that, and I discovered it quite late, that Medusa was a priestess, a beautiful priestess that served Athena in the temple of Athena, and she was raped by Poseidon, the god of the sea, who is in constant battle with Athena because he's the emotions, she's the head. And Athena blamed her for seducing Poseidon, which was not the case, but many women are blamed for seducing men, rape them. It's not uncommon. And she said to her, because you did what you did, you'll turn into this creature that will petrify everyone. So actually, when you think about it, Medusa is terribly lonely. She cannot have any human contact. And I think she represents the loneliness of the post-traumatized person. I think that in IBD, there is an element of post-traumatic stress, and many patients cannot share their symptoms with others because it will petrify them. So when I heard that 25% of patients don't share their employer, with their employer, the fact that they have IBD, now with a Czech doctor, it's that. Because if you say it, what you will see in the eyes of your employer, he might turn into stone, he might not know what to do. So actually it's very, very lonely. And the snakes of the, of the IBD, it's pain, fear of cancer, fear of surgery, isolation, fatigue, rectal incontinence, rectal bleeding, fear of stomachache, side effect of steroids, and other immunosuppressants. So the symptoms of being petrified are depression, which is the most common problem in IBD, up to 70%, and as we heard before, it might be because of the inflammation. But in depression, you feel worthless, helpless, and hopeless. And the treatment is to address all these elements. I already mentioned this, that chronic inflammation may result in decreased sensitivity to positive emotions. Anxiety is very common. Anxiety is about uncertainty and fear of irreversibility. This is a quote from a wonderful book by Gillian Thomas, who is a counselor that helps people with IBD because she herself has Crohn's. So she's a wounded healer, and it's a wonderful book, working therapeutically with clients with IBD. But Jessica Kinsley published 2009, and this is a quote from a patient who said, "I feel that having Crohn's is like living with an unexploded time bomb chained around my neck. You never know when it's going to go off. You only know that it will go off. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth all the pain and effort to get better, only to go through this recurring nightmare at a later stage." And this, I think, is very typical to, and unique, I think, to IBD, shame and disgust. You're not so ashamed to say that you had a coronary bypass. You're not so ashamed to say that you had a headache or hypothyroid. But to say that you had fecal incontinence, or that you have you break wind, or that you're on the toilet for 18 times a day, this is difficult. So to do something about redeeming us from shame, I sometimes use this lovely sentence of Ann Patchett, the American author, who said, "Shame should be reserved for the things we chose to do, not to the circumstances that life puts on us." So if you steal money from a beggar, you should be ashamed. But if you had any incontinence episodes, it's embarrassing, but you shouldn't be ashamed. It's not your fault. And I had a patient that had this thing in the queue to the supermarket, and he straight went to the street wanting a bus to run him over. So this is what, when you Google images of shame, you want to hide, you want to disappear. And then we had a lot of work about shame. Interestingly, they did the research, and they asked people who are about to die, palliative patients, 180 patients who are about to die, what can be worse than death? And they gave him a lot of symptoms, including confused all the time, need care all the time, rely on feeding tube to live in a nursing home all day, in a wheelchair, being on a ventilator. Bowel and bladder incontinence scored the highest, worse than death. So this is something that we as human beings, for some reason, find it extremely hard. Okay, so I try to conclude. What do we actually do in the psychological treatment. We reflect when Perseus had to bring the head of Medusa in order to take her and liberate his mother, who was captivated because the head was still activated even after it was cut off. He uses the reflection in the shield of Athena, because the shield is like a mirror, and she tells him, look at the mirror, it's not as powerful as her gaze. So when we face all the things that patients are afraid of, including taking new medication, adherences, we need to reflect together. And then we can cut the Medusa of fear. And what happens then, from the beheaded body of Medusa, Pegasus is being liberated. The winged horse, that when he touched the ground, from the first place where he touches the ground, the creek of the muses emerges, the creek that gave inspiration to all human creativity. So actually, when we overcome the thing that paralyzes us through reflection, we liberate a lot of energy. And this is why I actually love the logo of St. Mark's. It reminds me of Pegasus, the winged lion that is found in San Marco Palace in Venice. So just a little vignette of reflection. A patient with anal pain, actually they wrong diagnosed him as fissure, as having for fissure and piles, but it actually was Crohn's lesions that they were misdiagnosed. And he was sent to me because he was suicidal. And this is a brief conversation I had with him. The patient said, I'm suicidal. Me, why? Patient, I cannot live with this pain. Me, if you wouldn't have this pain, would you still want to kill yourself? Patient, are you mad? I have a great job, a wonderful girlfriend. Me, so do yourself a favor. Stop saying to everybody that you are suicidal. Tell them that you want help with managing this pain so it can be compatible with life. Yeah. So it's sometimes redefined. Most people who are suicidal don't want to die. They want out of pain. They want to be in a better state. This is a book, if you're interested. First book, 2015, Psychological Aspects of Inflammatory Bowel Disease, a Biopsychosocial Approach by Routledge. And we wrote here chapter 13 with Professor Hart in St. Mark's, how actually your psychological state affects your compliance. So last two slides, yeah, but this is important. I think you need to become the second mouse. Probably I need to explain it. This is Henri Laborie, a French surgeon, who did this experiment with mice. They took a mouse, put the mouse in a cage, gave him an electrical shock. The mouse escaped from the cage, nothing happened to him. So if you can escape from the cage of IBD, you'll be fine, but you can't. Then they took the mouse, put him in a cage, closed the door, gave him the shock. This time, he received the shock, which was disturbing, not dangerous, but he could not escape, and he was alone. This mouse started to become ill, loses its hair, and develops a peptic ulcer, vomits blood. Then they took two mice, put both of them in the cage, gave both of them the shock. Nothing happened to them because they were together. But the second mouse needs to be ready to be electrocuted. Yeah, so you need to take the pain of the other into you. I say it's not a problem because my patients are my second mice. I have such moving encounters that I don't feel alone. And we both survive the electrical shocks that come from the managers that tell me to see them only 6 times. Okay, there are cases, I'll jump. This is when, if you want to entertain yourself, a patient of mine with ulcerative colitis who had a pouch, when I was talking with him, I realized that he has a documentary about rappers. And he interviews all the rappers that come to the UK. And through the work with him, I helped him to get into a film school, and he's now studying to be a documentarist. Before, he couldn't believe that he can do anything. And then I realized that he has 30 hours of the interviews with all these rappers, and I stupidly asked him, is there a rap about IBD? Because they do raps about everything. He said, I don't think so. So I Googled it, and there is a rap about IBD. This guy, K-Dub, he suffers from Crohn's, and he has a wonderful rap. If you Google it, K-Dub, and you can hear this rap. And there is this wonderful line, which I think this is the essence of the treatment. IBD is something that you have, but it does not define who you are. Yeah, which goes to Hippocrates. And I really end with this. This is a bit of a quiz. Do you have any idea what it is? I promise not to analyze your answers. Any ideas from the crowd? Lesion. Lesion. Light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. When I saw it first, I saw it in a gallery in Manchester, dedicated to black and white in art. And I was really drawn to it because the black was very black. There was something very spiritual, and I thought about the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought about a candle in the wind. And then I go close, and I see that this is a work by this artist called Anthony Gormley, who created in England a huge sculpture, which is wonderful, The Angel of the North, which is also a sort of a brain, earth, gut axis. This huge angel stand on the earth. There's Anthony Gormley. So this work is from a series of works called Body and Soul. So I thought this is the soul in the darkness of the body. But then I go close to this, and this work is entitled Asshole. Asshole. This is actually a print of the asshole of Anthony Gormley. What he did, he printed all sorts of parts of his body on paper and also put ink on his behind and set, which I thought, this is wonderful, because this gives the asshole its spiritual importance. You know, Professor Phillips from St. Mark's always used to stand up. He was a colorectal surgeon and the director of St. Mark's. He used to say, try to put, if you hear me, said, try to put feces, air, yeah, and liquid in your hands and try to separate them, yeah? You cannot do it, but your asshole can do it. So, actually, we need to go on a campaign to redeem the asshole from its dirty connotation. Why an asshole is a curse? You know, you don't say to somebody, you're a nose, or you're an ear, or you're a lung, but you say you're an asshole, and it's not fair. So I think, and this is really the end, sorry, that actually in Judaism, there is a prayer that you need to say every time after defecation. I call it holy shit, yeah? I don't practice religion personally in an orthodox way. I believe that all religions are different pathways to the same things. But this blessing is nice. Obviously it's in Hebrew, so you cannot read it. So it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bara et ha'adam bechokma, ubara. In translation, thank you God, the King of the universe, that you created man in your wisdom. And you created in him these holes and these hollows. And you know that if one of them is blocked or if one of them is open too much, you cannot stand in front of you even for a short period of time and thank you. But thank you that you created such a magnificent thing. And I think thank you that you also created the treatment for IBD and your organization and everything. So if you want, you can say that when everything works. So there is an acknowledgement that this area is as holy as the upper part. Yeah? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Inspector. Are there any short questions or comments?
Is there a prayer also for the ostomy? For the ostomy. Interesting that you say it because I brought it in a lecture about the psyche and the stoma, and I added and thank you God for creating the stoma. You can add everything. He will accept.
Okay. Last comment. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.